Alright, hello everybody. So today's lesson is going to be focusing on a little bit of a different topic than our norm. Usually in this class we look at Western Europe, but today we're going to be focusing primarily on India. So if you would, please title your notes for today, Interwar India. Alright, so just for a little bit of recap, we wrapped up the First World War recently, and the map of Europe has undergone some pretty extreme changes as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. So, for many nations around the globe, the authority of Western Europe was beginning to be questioned. The map had been largely redrawn, and many people were looking at Europe as this unstable place, a place of uncertainty. Nationalism was beginning to surge in many nations, especially places like India, as citizens began to question their ownership to these larger nations, began to question if they could achieve their own independence. They looked at cases of Serbia and Bosnia, nations who ultimately achieved what they wanted by unifying, by uniting under a common people. So you may have heard of Gandhi previously, but you might not know too much about him per se. So Gandhi grew up in India in a poor Indian family. He wanted to travel to England to change the life of both him as well as the lives of his family members, so he decided that he wanted to travel to England to go and study law. Before leaving, he swore to his mother that he wouldn't give in to Western temptations and that he would always stay true to who he was. So take a look at primary source A. This is something coming from Gandhi himself, and it's titled Appeal for Enlistment. Gandhi writes, "Sisters and brothers of Quetta district, you are all lovers of independence from Britain. Some of you are members of the Home Rule League. One meaning of Home Rule is that we should become partners in the empire. Today, we are subject people. We do not enjoy all the rights of Englishmen. We are not today partners in the empire as are Canada, South Africa, and Australia. We are a dependency. We want the rights of Englishmen, and we aspire to be as much partners in the empire as the dominions overseas. As long as we have to look to Englishmen for our defense, as long as we are not free from fear of the military, so long as we cannot be regarded as equal partners with Englishmen. It behooves us, therefore, to learn that the use of arms and to acquire the ability to defend ourselves. If we want to learn the use of arms with the greatest possible dispatch, it is our duty to enlist ourselves in the army." So what I'd like you to do is answer this question. What exactly is Gandhi encouraging Indians to do here, and why? If you need to, pause the video now and respond to this question in your notes. After you've responded to primary source A, take a look at this. This one also coming from Gandhi a few years later. It's from The Story of My Experiments with Truth. This is actually an excerpt from Gandhi's autobiography, really covering his life from childhood up until about 1921. It was actually released in weekly installments in one of his journals published between 1925 and 1929. Gandhi writes, "I knew the difference of status between an Indian and an Englishman, but I did not believe that we had been quite reduced to slavery. I felt then that it was more of the fault of individual officials than of the British system, and that we could convert them by love. If we would improve our status through the help and cooperation of the British, it was our duty to win their help by standing by them in their hour of need." Just like before, respond to this question in your notebook. What was Gandhi's feeling about Great Britain prior to World War I? Once again, feel free to pause this video so that you can respond in your notes. So you might be wondering, what exactly is Home Rule? Home rule really refers to a dependency or a colony being able to rule over itself. So think back to the age of imperialism, one of our previous chapters. We talked about the difference of direct and indirect rule. In this case, home rule would really allow the colony or the dependency to control itself. So, interestingly, Gandhi actually supported the British in World War I. Don't forget, he had lived in Great Britain for many years studying law. His thought process was that if the Indians supported the British in the war, it would really give them recognition. It would give them respect as British subjects. As Gandhi pointed out previously, he wanted India to be thought of the same way that the British looked at Canada and Australia, other regions that they controlled. Perhaps, in Gandhi's view, this might even lead to Indian independence. The problem for the British is after World War I, nationalism continued to surge all over the world. The Black Hand assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand out of this nationalistic spirit. In the long term, their aggression really paid off. They were able to become their own country, Yugoslavia, uniting with Bosnia. And many in India felt that aggressive protest, aggressive action, was the way to achieve independence. So during World War I, the British promised reforms for India in exchange for their support. However, after the Great War came to an end, these promises largely were not kept. Indian nationalists began crying out for home rule, for independence. Now enter someone like Gandhi, providing a little bit of a different perspective on what the best way to achieve home rule would be. The problem for the people living in India is the British adopted some pretty harsh tactics for ensuring that India remained a dependency. Think back to the age of imperialism. India was known as the jewel in the crown, the most profitable of all of the British possessions. After the First World War, the British passed what's called the Rowlatt Act, and this was meant to stop protests from happening and to maintain wartime restrictions. Many restrictions were put on India in the interim during the war, simply to maintain order while the British were fighting against the Central Powers. The Rowlatt Act set strong curfews. People weren't allowed out after dark. It suppressed freedom of speech. Certain newspapers were shut down. Any kind of propaganda that spoke out against the British was largely suppressed. And it also allowed officials who were in India to arrest and detain any Indians who were speaking out against the British government. So Gandhi begins adopting a new approach to protest called pacifism, which essentially is a way of pushing for what you want without becoming overly aggressive or overly violent. Initially, Gandhi proposed what's called a hartal, a day of fasting, prayer, and abstinence from physical labor. And again, this form of protest doesn't necessarily hurt anyone, or do any damage, or cause any kind of fatality or death, but it can be very impactful nonetheless. So on April 6th, 1919, millions of Indians simply refused to go to work. And just like that, the British economy came to a screeching halt. Was this the kind of protest to cause mass casualties? No. But simply by doing this one act of defiance, Gandhi solidified his power in India as a figure who had a lot of influence and could really mobilize Indian people in the movement for home rule.